So there are several CMDB discussions that are ongoing. I decided to, I had a filler because the original group that was supposed to do this, they dropped out at the last minute. So I had to have a filler, and I figured, well, I'll do CMDB, but we have quite a few. So I thought I'd do it as a question followed by an answer discussion type session. So it's really going to touch up on various areas that I have run into as a consultant dealing with the CMDB, and asking questions just to kind of like give you an education aspect and see if you are aware of some of these things that happen. And that's basically what I get into, is try to teach you. When people ask me to come and do consultant work, I'm a diehard instructor. I started out as an instructor in the military. My 5-year period, I did instructing work and evaluations and stuff like that, certification to the Air Force. And then when I finished my last 2 years, I got bored being a master sergeant of 1,600 people in education. So I thought I'd go back into training. So I started teaching how to do web development and the Netscape. Everybody remember the Netscape browser? Teaching the Netscape browser. And my wife even got into one of my classes too to understand the Netscape. And then the support people got pissed off at me because I was teaching web development and how to build web pages. And all of a sudden their web servers are starting to crash because everybody's trying to build web pages for their organization. So the training helped. At least it told me that a lot of people wanted it. Plus, when we opened it up to the entire National Security Agency, we had 200 people ask for a training class, and I was the only instructor within the first hour. So then I had to go and train people to open it up. So that's where I really got heavy into the training. And that's what I do when I do it as a consultant service. When you ask me to come and help you to do something or work on it, I try to put a twist on it and have you do it, but I'm there to work with you. So you learn it, and then you'll call me to come back in and do something else instead of the same thing, because you should already have it. So that's why I go in and ask questions. And for example, in the CMDB, how many common data models do you have? Does anybody know? How many common data models would you have in the Atrium BMC CMDB? There's 2. Okay. What is a common data model? A common data model is your architecture layout of all of your storage of your resources, your assets, or we call them configuration items. Okay. So you have 2. They're called CI class and CI relationship. The CI class is storing your actual configuration items, the attributes of those items, okay? And it allows you to connect one of those CIs to one or more CIs within the system. Now, I'm not getting into the CI tied to an incident, the CI tied to a change. That's not the CMDB. That is federated data. Is everybody familiar with federated data? It's extending your common data model. So when you incorporate incident or ITSM on top of CMDB, you're extending the model by adding in all of those federated links to incident change process and so forth. Okay. CI relationship is your storage of a CI tied to a CI. And it also involves a set of rules. Does anybody know what cascade delete means? Do you use cascade delete on a CI relationship? Cascade delete is basically, I have a CI, a parent CI, and if you delete that record and you say cascade delete is equal to yes, it's going to delete the relationship and the child. And then we'll try to delete the child's other connections that it has. So if I was to delete this laptop, I want to get rid of all the software that I pulled in from the outside, I would say cascade delete is equal to yes. BMC does not turn that on any out-of-the-box functionality. So if you wanted to get rid of the orphans, then you would mark that to get rid of it, okay? Or you're just going to have to run several reconciliation jobs to make sure that that data is gone. So is there any questions on the different common data models? Okay, how can you see what the model is? You have an old school and a new school. On the left-hand side is the old school. You go into the ITSM side of it, go into BMC, Atrium, CMDB side of it. And then you can actually see in here the architecture chart. Now, BMC does have a huge page that you can look at it Well, they did. I don't think they produce it anymore. Because it's hard to me, whenever you get a CMDB, you automatically change it because you're adding, you're extending. So that chart is really no good. But this one will show you whatever the types of classes that you're dealing with. So I like the left-hand side. What I can tell from the left-hand side is what I can't tell on the right-hand side. The right-hand side is that new CMDB console, or they call it the dashboard console. Can you tell me which of these classes is a regular class versus an abstract class versus a categorization or subcategorization class? I can on the left, I cannot on the right. Okay, so that's what I like the old chart. I'm still old school, and I'll go back into that back section. Okay. When you're looking at the CI relationship model, what I loved about what BMC did, I don't know, 6, 8, maybe 8 years ago, in the older models, they had every one of these classes on the right-hand side in its own table. And people were, like myself, was building a form to store all that data in it. Then they finally got smart and called the base relationship form and put that in to connect everything to. Okay. So now all you have to do is connect the base relationship, the base element, and run your reports off. Where before I had to build that connection to make that happen. So this is your model for the relationship on the left and your model for the relationship on the right. When you're looking at the relationship on the right, you have contract component, hosted system component, offering measured by, things like that. Those are what we call the one-to-many relationships. And this is where you could do the cascade delete capability. This is where you can do the weak relationship functionality. It has to be a one-to-one or one-to-many. You can't do many-to-many or many-to-one. Okay? But what people don't like about it is it locks you into not sharing that child with another parent. Like, how many of you have 2 or 3 monitors tied to your CPU? How many of you have 2 CPUs tied to those 3 monitors? If you have that environment, you can't do hosted system component. You have to go with component because you can't do one-to-many when you have the CPU tied to these 3 monitors, and then you have another CPU that's going to use the same 3 monitors. You can't do hosted system component. Won't let you do it. So you need to understand what these relationships provide you. Now, here's another question. What is the difference between abstract with data replication and abstract without data replication? Have you ever used it? Do you have any classes that are abstract without data replication? How many of you work in CMDB? Anybody have work in CMDB? Just 1? 2? BMC underscore system class, BMC underscore system component class. Those are called abstract classes. And those are abstract without data replication. I like to call them an organizational class. As an organizational class, you put an attribute in the BMC system, it feeds it to the children below it, puts it in the application system, puts it in the computer system, puts it in the cluster. And it stores it in the children tables and shares it with its children or grandchildren, if you want, whatever you want to call it. So it's an organizational chart. When you put data in the computer system class, does it feed data to BMC system? If you put data in the product class, does it feed it to the system component? The answer is no. That's where the difference is. Abstract without data replication is no storage of data. It's only an organizational chart. Why would you ever want to do with data replication? I always use the example of the physical location class. I put underneath it rooms. Because if I'm a manager, a facilities manager, and I need to know what's in each room, I'll create a class and I'll call it an abstract with data replication because this room and the room next to it has like attributes that I want to report on. I want to know if it has carpet. I want to know if it has what type of wall. I want to know how many outlets does it have, what type of lights are. And that's going to be in any type of room that you get, network room, conference room, office, you name it. So I'm going to create an abstract with data replication. Then when the facilities manager wants a report on how many light fixtures do they have or carpeting or things like that, I can run a report off of that one single form in Remedy from the data replication. So that's the difference between these two right here, is that one is storing data and the other one is not. but they both pass storage information, pass the fields, and so forth down the path. Any questions on the abstract? Okay. When you're looking on the chart, you can see if it's a dash or if it's dots or if it's a full solid circle around it. In here, you actually have to open up the class and then you have to look at it unless you're going to edit. And you could read it on the BMC system. It barely tells you, it says this is an abstract class. But you'll have to edit it to see if it's an abstract with replication or without. And everything that BMC does is without replication. So you're the one that's going to create that table for you. Any questions on that? Any of you purge your data? No? What's that? You don't purge anything? Okay. I had a customer that worked at a nuclear laboratory, did not want me to purge anything because they were afraid if I ran the purge, it would purge other things than what was marked as purge. Does everybody know what purge means? You're deleting assets that are marked as delete is equal to yes. Delete is different. You have an activity called purge and an activity called delete. Delete is based on, you want me to get rid of all of BMC.asset? I'll wipe out your data. That happened at this National Nuclear Laboratory because somebody didn't know how to work it, set it to delete, set a purge, ran it, and wiped out all of our data that we had just imported in. And we were getting ready to showcase what we did the next day. So we had to cancel it, rerun everything, and then that's when they put the kibosh. Don't delete anything. I said, we got sample data here. I've got to purge it. You just got to know what you're doing. So mistakes happen, but that was a big mistake. Okay. So purging, it basically happens that way. Well, prior to when I joined this current company, they imported a lot of the data. And when you bring in your people profiles, it feeds it into the BMC_person class. And they had a lot of these BMC.asset.sandbox CIs. And I kept on looking at the log. Why am I getting 3,000, what I say it was, 3,000 something errors? 3,465 errors showing up in the log file. And you already know how hard it is to read these log files, right? You ever look at the error log, error debug log and stuff? So I'm trying to find out what else is happening all through this mix. So I'm like, you know what? Let me clean it up. So I found out all these BMC.asset.sandbox records were there, and it was trying to merge it, identify it, merge it, but it couldn't find anything to do it, so it flagged it as an error. Okay, so that was the error that I was getting. So just to let you know, I went into the BMC_person class, and I found everything that was BMC.asset.sandbox and deleted them all. Is that the right way to do it? It works, but is that the right way to do it? That's the question. I mean, the reason why you don't want to do it with the manual process is because it's not just deleting the record out of BMC_person, it's deleting it out of all the forms in that common data model and all the forms in the relationship connections, which is in this case the AST:CMDB association form. And if there's any asset or incidences and so forth, it's looking there as well. So each record you're deleting is checking a multitude of forms to remove. Just read the logs when you run it. You'll see that. Okay. So in this case, I got rid of them, but then I still had some issues. So I went into the new dashboard, brought up the reconciliation engine, found one that had an activity designator of purge, and I changed the sample one that BMC gives you and just threw in BMC.asset to purge the data that was marked as delete, because I made sure they're all marked as delete is equal to yes. And then when I ran it, it took care of it. Okay. So then when I looked at the log files, my logs were no longer an issue. Now, would I change this back? Well, I'm never using sample, so I just kept it as mine, but it's up to you on however you want to do that. Okay. So again, mark as delete is equal to yes is your purging reference. Anybody have, I'm going to go back and say that this is 19.02 and older. Anybody have any of those environments that are 19.02 or older? When you have a CI to a CI connection, what happens to that connection when you hit the remove button down here at the bottom left? Do you remember what? Did you even think about it? It would mark the relationship as mark as delete is equal to yes. And if you didn't purge anything, guess what? All those relationships are still there. I found that out at this National Nuclear Laboratory because when I was running reports, I was getting triplicates. And I'm like, what the heck is this computer tied to 5 different monitors? Because we didn't look at the mark as delete is equal to no or blank. We didn't put that qualification in there, or we would have had it because I wasn't allowed to purge it. So we had to change our report to get the more accurate information. Well, now in this version, if you hit it, it actually goes away. Okay. It actually removes it altogether. Where before it would just mark it as purge is equal or mark as delete is equal to yes, and then get rid of it at that point. Which version? I'm in 2008, and that's what this is, and it seems to be working in that aspect. So. Yeah. Well, even with the simple purging of your BMC.ASA, which BMC used to have purged, but I don't know if you ever look at your reconciliation engines, BMC out of the box would mark the purge as enabled. Then later versions, I don't know how far back you go, they disabled all the purges. So you do the identification and merge, but they wouldn't get rid of the BMC.asset.sandbox or the bulk, or when you use the reconciliation in or the data management tool. What is the data set for the data management tool? It's that ITSM one. Those are still in it. So I'm getting all these records. I don't want those records because I don't need them. So they marked it as inactive. And I asked them, why did you mark this as inactive when you had it active before? They said, we want the customer to decide when to purge it. They didn't want to decide it for them. So I guess maybe somebody screwed up and purged the wrong thing and they shouldn't have done it. But again, why would you purge something if you didn't have it? Here's another question. How many of you have created or plan on creating new data set IDs? Okay, you have a ton. Who can see the data set IDs?
We have that, but one of the things that we do is instead of doing purges, we have an archive data set.
Okay.
Instead of deleting our CIs, we move them into the archive data set and then have mechanisms to potentially restore those to something accidentally.
Do you archive everything that's connected to it in every piece, like the AST attributes?
We have a copy of the AST attributes because the join AST is.
Well, apparently with the 20 or was it 21.03.01, the AST attributes is supposedly going away. I don't know. I don't think it is, but I have. Don't ask me. That's what they told me, was that it was going to go away. But do you understand why they brought in AST attributes to begin with? To speed up reconciliation, because these are attributes that don't require a reconciliation from discovery. So they moved it to the AST attributes, which I wish they didn't. Pain in the ass when you're doing stuff, because I had a nice custom thing that I could put in a custom form. All they had to do is fill it out, put in, I want 15, hit a button, and I'd create 15 computer records, or I still have it. It still works, but now you have to do one more thing to it, and that's getting the AST attributes to update with the reconciliation number that matches to it. So I had to add in an escalation to come behind it to do it. But again, when they did that is because the reconciliation was taking too long with too many attributes to reconcile. So they separated. Now, I just heard yesterday that they are removing it, but they didn't say what's happening with the field. So once I go to 21.03.01, that's one of the first things I'm going to look for. So just wanted to point that. The data set ID, when you create a new data set ID in the BMC.core.config BMC_dataset form, it creates a record there. But if you look here in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see 2 fields. This is the CMDB row level security. It's CMDB write security. When you create a new dataset ID, it blanks it out. So the only person that can see it is you, the administrator. So if I go into the old asset console of ITSM, and I want to view that new data set to see what the discovery brought in or what you brought in on the import, guess what? I'm not going to see it. And I've had customers ask for it. So that's how I found this out, was I'd go in and add public or add the asset manager or admin to it so they can see. So this is where you control who can see the actual discovery data. Every one of these data set IDs that you see in here are all public, except for the one I created. It's somebody's watch. Must be Jason's watch or whatever. You're doing a cat with the flight up on the top. it caught me off guard too. I saw it. It's like, oh. It's like, okay, I caught it. I'm a cat. Hey, I said in my recliner, and we have the kitchen light on, and it reflects off my Fitbit, and it hits on the floor, and the cats are running around. I'm like, what the heck is what's she doing? And I see the reflections coming off of my Fitbit. So then I started playing around with it. So. What is propagated attributes? Have you ever heard of the word propagated?
You want something to go from a parent to a child.
Weak relationship is another word, another terminology. So you're using the weak relationship to propagate data between the parent to the child. Why would you want to pass data from a parent to a child? Reporting. There you go. The status of the parent, or they wanted to, what is the serial number of the parent so I can run a report. They don't want to have a custom form. You want to pass that data. So that's where you get into this weak relationship functionality, or propagated is what they call it. So when you use the class, in this case, a hosted system component relationship, it has to be a one-to-one or one-to-many. And then down at the bottom, you can see the two fields. In this case, is the class ID and the name. So they want to pass the parent down to the child, is what they're doing. So you could run a report to say, this computer has all of this software and hardware in a report. But then if I say, well, what if I want to know this information? Well, about the computer. Then you really need to look at, well, where do I run the report from? Maybe AST computer system, or BMC.core, BMC underscore computer system tied to a relationship class. You have to look at when you start getting deeper and deeper. I don't change the weak relationship because they already passed the information for what they want from the children. But if they want more from the parent and add it to the child, I look at bringing those two main forms together, similar along the lines. Okay.
We've used it for location data as well. Temperature, sector, size, you want to pass that down to like related monitor or something.
I guess, well, yeah, because not all of the hardware or software gets the location fed to it when you do a relationship designator.
Yeah, it's not. We just added to the weekly propagated, so wherever that computer is now, if it has a related monitor, that location is kind of
right. And it helps when you're doing a ticket to replace the monitor. They know they don't have to look at the computer; they can look at the monitor, see what.
You can update the location in one spot, and updates it 15 minutes later.
Yeah. Anybody ever use the OBJ STR class form? Using some workflow? Well, one of the things I use the form for is over in the top right-hand corner, third field from the right. It's called class description. If you put in the search does not equal to $, you'll get every description about every class in that form. Because if you remember looking at the more information and looking at the description, you can see the breakout of the computer system and what you put in here. So what I do is I put this in a spreadsheet and give it to the customer and say, here's what every CI represents. This is what you need to look at it putting into the CMDB. So again, don't put $, because it'll give you an SQL error. I haven't figured that one out. But if I put does not equal to null, $, it runs the search and finds all the records that has something in it. So class description gives you that capability. You could also look at here in the left-hand side, you can see the class name and the superclass. So you now know what is the parent versus the child. So when I look at this one, I know any attributes and relationships that are tied to BMC underscore system is usable by BMC underscore computer system, because computer system is a child of the system class. Everybody see that? What's those negative numbers in the class instance view permissions and visible permissions? What's those negative numbers? The roles. CMDB is a deployable application, and it uses roles. So does ITSM. But these are the roles that are tied to the CMDB application designator. Any questions on this form so far? I have used this to fix a class that hung up, because if it's still stuck on change pending status, delete the record, because it's hung up somewhere because it didn't complete the build out process of your new class. Okay. And I'm very particular about building or adding on. I'll create the CI class and save it. Then I'll go in and add the attributes. Then I'll go in and start configuring the indexes and things like that. I am very, very leery about saying, well, let me do it all at once, because I always have to go to this form or the attribute definition form or whatever to look for pending to delete it. And it just takes forever. So I do it in piecemeal to make sure that I get what I need. So I use that one. And this is where I was saying, if you do the dollar note does not equal to dollar and bill, you can see the description and just send it to an Excel spreadsheet. You can also go down to the bottom and see the entire architecture path. But when you look at it, don't get confused as to what the heck is BMC underscore asset base. That's really BMC underscore base element. That's the class that it is. So you can look at this. Any questions on that? Did you know that you could go into the asset management configuration side of the foundation and change the label of the classes? It doesn't change it in Smart IT, but if you're using the old system on the back, you can change the form from physical location to buildings if you wanted to. So they're saying as buildings, but in the back end, you're still seeing as physical location. But don't change it either, because this is the path. All right. What form holds all of the attributes in every class in CMDB? Do I have to go to the CMDB class console or the dashboard console to pull up all the attributes? Nope. You can just go to this form here, objstr underscore attribute class underscore join, do a search on the form that you're looking for, and it only shows you the attributes that are modifiable in that class. So in this one right here, when I did the search for the class of computer system, it only showed me what was the number? 34 fields that are in computer system. So these are the fields that I can modify in computer system. If I wanted all the fields, I'd have to also do a search on BMC underscore base element to get all the attributes from there. Any questions there? So at least you could have a report. And if I come out and do some changes for you, guess what? I'm pulling it off of here to give you, here's my custom field. Indexing. If you have an index, you can go to this form here, objstr a index class underscore join, and see what attributes are indexed. Other than field number 1, you notice, I don't know if you can see it, very clear back there, not a single CI class is set with an index. So if you're doing a lot of data that's coming in, a lot of searches, you may want to index some of those attributes, like data set ID. Well, status is on AST attributes. Status is not really on the CMDB class. And then there's a few more in here. You can look at objstr pending for any issues. Next field ID, so you can see what's the next field number that's in the entire Atrium core designator. You can look at the objstr class stub, which is the form that connects to any subcategorization class you create. So it puts a record in that form to show you, hey, this, I want to say the media is a subclass. The media is connected to that form that builds the join form in render. Everybody knows what a classification class is, right? Or I'm sorry, categorization class. Everybody know what a categorization class is? A user helper. I want to know, where are all of my laser printers? Well, look in the printer class. No, I want to be able to search on just laser printers. I want to be able to go into that form and say, does not equal to null or greater than 0, and just give me all the laser printers. Guess what? I'll create a categorization class under printer, and you'll store all of your laser printers in that class. And then they can do a search, which is not the right thing to do because they're supposed to use the prod cat. But they don't want to do it. They're too lazy. I've had that happen. So like I said, I wanted to touch base on just discussions to get you to start thinking about the CMDB architecture layout and so forth. How many of you are using Helix? Anybody using BMC Helix at all? Are you all on-prem? All on-prem? Okay. If you do switch to Helix, definitely check the log files, because BMC tapped somebody else's discovery into our production. Fortunately, our system did not recognize the data that was trying to come in and flagged it as an error and put it in the AR error log. And I'm looking at, and you're going to see this if you stay with some of my, in my evening session, you're going to see what the log error showed up. And I had put in a BMC ticket, and it took me 3 weeks to convince them it was on their end. Somebody on your end is pointing somebody else's stuff into my system. And they finally came back and said, nothing. They didn't say anything. They did something, and I looked at the log, and part of it was gone. I'm like, so what did you do? Nothing. Ran it again the next day. Everything was gone now. The connections are all gone. I said, what did you do? Can't tell you. I know what you did. You had to redirect them to somewhere else. So that's one of the things that you got to be aware of, is always look at your CMDB and look at the discovery data process. My current customer is starting to work with SCCM integration. And the problem that we ran into on the SCCM integration is BMC set the qualification, and they only asked to look at the last 24 or 48 hours of what scanned. And we only got 12 computers. And nobody even looked at it as to why did we only get 12 computers when we ran our tests. My boss is like saying, well, we have something like 5,000 computers. Why did we only get 12? I said, look at the qualification. And so when I looked at the qualification, we reran it. We got just under 5,000 computers coming. But what my boss didn't realize is we also got 5 million records coming in with all the software that SCCM pulled in too. Because we were doing it as a test run, and it pulls in like 16, 17 different CI types. So then I told him, you have to sit down and look at the architecture and see, what do you want me to remove? What connections do you want me to remove? Do you really need the IP address? Yes. Okay. Do you really need the median? No. Take out the median. There's even a floppy drive on BMC's connection still. Floppy drive.
The one thing I had a problem with their SCCM adapter was if you don't bring in the computer system, it's still going to bring in the applications and the IP address. You just bring in a bunch of orphans.
Oh, yeah.
So I linked it, so don't bring that in unless I created the main CI.
Right. So those are the kind of things you have to look at when you're doing discovery process in that capacity. So that's what you got to be aware of in some of these things. Now, with BMC, you know, they give you an adapter for SCCM, which the adapter, they basically build the reconciliation job for you. They build the normalization process for you. They build the Atrium integration engine job for you. They build all the connections, but you still need to look at all those connections and make sure that they're fitting the needs that you need to utilize. But I had a customer that I worked with that refused to put in the adapter. He took the SCCM data. He was a DBA, put it in a database table on the Remedy system, then created the Atrium integrator job himself and pointed to this to bring it into the class. And what happened with is all of this took over a year for him to do. When all he had to do was put the adapter in and would have been good to go in a couple of days to test it. But we wasted a whole year. And I kept on telling him, let's put the adapter. Let's put the adapter. And our boss would go with him because he's the DBA, and I go with me. And he would kept on asking, well, how long, when's it going to be done? He kept on saying, by Friday. When's it going to be done? By Friday. Every time was always by Friday. And he never really got it done 100%.
Generally speaking, DBAs and Remedy companies, they work great at the database layer, but they don't like or understand how Remedy does it.
Right. And he didn't. And he's no longer doing it anymore, but he was still doing it when I left. He was the DBA/Remedy person, but he was making the wrong decisions in that aspect. He was the one that actually ran the delete action too. So, but I can't fault him because I did delete somebody's activity logs of 28,000 records on production. And fortunately, they did the backup. The DBA bailed me out on this one. He backed up the data every day. So we only lost maybe 25 records after they recovered it and put it back in. So fortunately for that. But I learned, I don't know if you ever remember in a push field action, the push field F statement. BMC says if you leave it blank, it automatically creates a ticket. Stupid me, believing them, on production, left it blank, and it updated all the records. And the record was the same record 28,000 times. So I always put 1 = 2 now if I wanted to create instead of leaving it blank.
See, I always at least change it to only update one instead of all matching. So if it's gonna mess things up, it's only gonna be one record.
Well, this is to get it to create, but I do say that I do that too, is to modify only one,
Oh, okay.
not all matching. I don't like to do the error because I don't want it to flag as an error. But again, I modified everything. So I've made my mistakes too. Any questions on CMDB at all?
We have a fun problem that we can run into is we have a custom receiving console that goes in and creates the CIs on the receiver. And it will do it in bulk, right? Let's say that they get 500 laptops into the so I'm going to receive 500 laptops. It works great up until a point, but the problem is there's so much filter overhead on the BMC, the CMDB side, that you end up maxing out the max number of filters per operation.
What you're setting on the max filters?
Something like 100,000. So for every CI created, it triggers something like 2,000.
You know what BMC sets that mark to? 999,999. Because you would see it grow as you go to different versions, and those settings are astronomical.
Right.
So
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if there's any suggestions on how we might get by. I know how we're planning on approaching.
well, you don't do you normalize the data set that you're bringing in? Do you run a reconciliation?
There's a pre-normalization process that happens prior to.
So you're not running the normalization engine, you're doing a normalization through something else.
Yeah, it happens prior to receipt. So you can't actually get the receipt button to activate until it's going to match something properly.
And is this off of a custom form that you built, or?
Yeah.
I mean, one thing if you really wanted to try other areas, you could look at the purchasing requisition form and build it there. Well, I mean, I put it in there to say, all right, we ordered 5,000. So I put 5,000, then the warehouse would go in and say, how many did you receive? And all they had to do is go and pick and say, we received 500, then would create the records for it, for the system. But with the workflow, the only thing I can tell you is just to increase that number, because BMC's increased it to 999,999, which I don't like that, because if I do a filter guide and I don't close it, yeah, but that's one of the settings that they escalate. And I get it, because you're doing a lot of these filters, pushing it to all these classes and stuff like that.
Yeah, so what we're planning on doing right now is whenever we do hit a huge number, like 500, we actually chunk it out and send it off to a staging record that will sit for about a minute until an escalation will pick them up. So we'll chunk it out to groups of 100, so we'll all run the separate process.
So you kind of do like the email system does,
Kind of.
where it chunks out at, up to, I think it's 100 records at a time now. I think
100
so.
by default, once every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Which is
Well, no, it runs every minute, because we set our email to 1 every minute, and it chunks it by 100.
yeah.
And I've had it where it actually slowed down, but the problem was it was the storage of the records in that email system, which could be the same thing you're going to run if in your staging. For you delete the record after the staging is done.
It depends. It depends on, because it's a custom staging form. It's either it's a flag you can set on the staging form, but either will do it or.
Right. As long as you have that, because a lot of people just build it and don't even think about it, and then all of a sudden you're up to 4 or 5 million records, and then you're now getting into performance issues because it's slow. And that's what we happened on the email system, is they kept we have to keep all these emails. I'm like, why? So we can verify that they did it. Well, guess what? I mean, yeah. And you could also archive it too. So we archived it, but we had to archive it all the way down to, and it was an older system. It was like 8.1 or 8, yeah, I think it's 8.1. And the problem in that environment was that we had to take it down to just 2 months in the regular form and archive it after 2 months of storage. And they were looking at on the ticket, was it actually viewable? I mean, did they ever get a notification on the ticket? They had a table that showed all the notifications that were sent out. So we had to alter that table to show both the archive and the ongoing. So we had, I mean, it was a little difficult in that. But again, if you look at it, the email doesn't change. So we basically archived it, left it there, but then we came in with the escalation to delete it. So we deleted the record, but we still had everything in the archive form. Anything else on CMDB? Trying to think of other things I've encountered. I mean, reconciliation, normalization, federated data, impact. Anybody use the impact manager? Whatever happened to BMC's impact? Was it impact management? They had an application where they give you impact analysis or analyzer, and then they would come in with a BMC impact management, which would replace that and let you see the red flags of all the links and everything else. But I haven't heard anything about that product in years. I don't know if they still have it or not.
I mean, the impact simulator is still.
The impact simulator is there, but how many people actually use it? Because you got to manually build some of the structure for it.
Some of it depends on how you build the relationships. But, yeah, one of the things that we did was extend the CMDB to cover our electrical systems.
Right.
So we can track the whole power linkage to our systems and our servers to make sure that if somebody hits this breaker, you're going to break and then they can exchange and everything else. We needed to have that impact simulation model in place so that we could propagate what the impacts were.
Are you concerned about cables at all? Tracking of the cables?
To some extent, yeah, but our customer is using another product right now.
Well, see, my customer at the time was the nuclear laboratory, and they do the green cables versus the red cables, I think. One for the secure line and one for the unsecure line. And they wanted a custom form to be able to see the connections of all the cables and every endpoint to it. So I built a custom form that when they said, hey, here's this computer, I want to see all of this server, I want to see all of the cables connected to that server and the computer system, printer, whatever that's connected to it. So I had to look at where's your data stored. I have it. I mean, I don't throw away anything. I have a nice little documentation of custom form that they can actually pull down and see it. And it gives them kind of like in archaic data tables where they can see all of their cables and they can see which ones are connected, which ones are not connected. But because it's all manual process, it's up to their agents to actually update the record to make sure that it's valid. Well, they're required to, because they do have some asset managers that are assholes that really make sure that they follow the process, which is good. I like those. I like those people because they force it. I mean, I do like your patch management, which basically you take it out of the manual process. But some of these organizations, they can't do that because of the security behind it. So they do a lot of stuff manually. So you have that function. I had one guy that had an Excel spreadsheet of all of his computers, all of his assets, and they didn't have a system. So I was putting them into the CMDB, and he goes, well, I still want that Excel spreadsheet capability where I can put in information in one row, highlight it, drag it down, and create 15 computers off of that. So I built a custom form so he could do that, put the number 15, hit a button, and it would generate 15 records in whatever class that he wanted, whether it's computers, monitors, keyboards, or whatever. I have that and all the workflow tied to that. Now, when BMC came out with AST attributes, I had to modify that because then I had to throw in an escalation that I had to run manually because I didn't want it to run all the time to check AST attributes. So I'd have it say, if it hasn't been reconciled, now go ahead and reconcile. So when I was ready, I'd go into the Dev Studio and say, run now, and it would run it, and then everything's connected. It may be a different way to do it, but that's how I got it to. But it would automatically run the reconciliation, so you could always relate or connect those things to it. So that's when you deal with customers. They want specific stuff. Then that's when we come in and start doing our wizardry and develop stuff for them. So,
Yeah.
okay, well, was this an okay session where you learned a little bit? Do you like this kind of training type session?
Yeah, very much. We don't use this. We try to get there, but it's a lot to set it up and we don't really have stuff to do that, so.
It is, and that's the problem. A lot of people don't understand is the CMDB as itself is more than just a developer of ITSM can handle. And when I went to one of the insurance companies and told them you need to have 3 people to manage this entire ITSM beast if you want to do it. You have to have somebody that handles the ITSM side, you have to have somebody that handles the CMDB side, and you have to have somebody that handles the remedy side of all the customizations and so forth. And they said, well, why don't you talk to our manager? So they brought in 5 of their managers. I told them the same story. They asked me a lot of questions, and I told them why, and they ended up hiring another person. So they had this one developer doing everything. They brought in somebody else to help because she was working 16 hours a day and she had a family, kids, and was not even hardly seen. So, and I basically am the black sheep of BMC. I basically tell you how it is. So if there's problems and stuff like that. So if there's a bug, I'll probably find it, and I'll let you know if there's a bug. So, well, this is what we try to do here in this conference is to give you training. BMC does BMC Exchange, which gives you more on the futures of the product, more on the why you should buy this product, why you should go this direction, and so forth. But we like the technical aspect. I like the technical aspect, but the customer, let them know what they're getting into, and they have a better understanding what the product can do. And so that's why we run most of our presentations this way, and we try to get the BMC to do that as well. Is what we're trying to focus on, turning that into an education side. Okay. Well, I thank you for your time, and see you in the next session.